AM 970 WSTX presents Straight Talk with Redfield. Now here's your host, Senator Holland Redfield.
All right, you think it's easy out there. However, come on, suck it up. We're going to make it. We've got challenges before that we've been able to go through, and Holland is trying to confuse you today with the facts. Isn't that a novelty, Bob? What do you think? Confuse everybody with the facts today?
Well, I tell you, if anybody wasn't confused before, just listen and you'll be confused afterwards.
Do you remember the fax machine? Do they still
I remember
have
those. Yes, we had, all of us had those, and we had the mimeograph when we were kids.
Well, and remember the smell. We got Judge Diase here, and of course, this was before her time.
Well,
she never was introduced to that kind of thing, were you?
With a fax machine?
Yeah, did you?
No,
we're talking about mimeograph.
Oh, mimeograph,
with
no.
ink on everybody. I mean, the ink was like permanent on your hands.
It was like cologne.
Wow.
Now, did you have, as kids, we had blackboards, the literal blackboards with chalk,
sure.
And the kids, the really nice kids, after class, got to clap the erasures. Now, the erasures got filled with chalk. And we would go out on the roof, because we're in New York City, go out on the roof, clapping the erasures. It was a great honor to do that.
And all that white dust, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Right. Judge, a pleasant, by the way, a pleasant good afternoon to each and every one of you out there. And I've got the honor to have Judge Diase here, and we're going to see whether we can ruin her day.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here. And good afternoon to the listening audience.
Did you ever hear the story about Pinocchio and their nose grows? I had some politicians here, not you, that occasionally Bob and I witness it. What do you think?
Well, we've had several that went and got nose jobs after they left.
In any event. Oh, come on out there. We're having a little fun. You got to let little Redfield lighten up. Remember, I can remember getting through my political career, and I used to have to keep a sense of humor.
Definitely.
Because let me tell you, this place can really get down in the dumps.
Yes.
So, let me ask you about any important observations you have had regarding, the new individual in justice. I guess it's Mr. Walker, or Attorney Walker, obviously. And are you still holding to that position, that you believe that the position should be an elected position?
Yes, definitely. We should have an elected AG. It should be a totally separate Department of Justice, independent, with an independent Inspector General. I think the two go hand in hand. And I don't know Attorney Walker personally or professionally. I've never had anything, any type of matter with him. I wish him all the best. It's a difficult job. I'm glad to see that office is pursuing child support arrears, because I can tell you...
I was going to talk to you about that.
Yes, I can tell you, when I was a judge sitting in the family division, I had files that were sometimes, and I'm not exaggerating, 6 inches thick. Just one parent who was not supporting the children, and the file would be that thick because there were so many court hearings. But you have to understand, we have a very bad economy in St. Croix, and if someone is not able to find a job, what is a judge supposed to do? How are you going to get money out of that father or parent?
But you do have ones that do have a job, and they had reflected there is something like $24 million on the street that actually work for the government of the Virgin Islands.
I read that, yes.
And it's my understanding, as a judge, you issue an order, and then, of course, the Attorney General office is supposed to notify. Am I correct?
Yes.
We'll say the government agency, and there's an automatic deduct. Why? Now, that's money you can capture right away. So why isn't that being done?
I don't know, and there should be an internal investigation, an audit done of that office, and I believe there has been a call for an audit of that office to find out.
Garnishment is very easy with a government check.
That's right.
Of course it is, or a large corporation as well.
That's right, or private employer as well.
That's what I'm talking, because they're actually, if they don't comply, they're in violation, or they're, in violation of the order, right?
936 individuals were noted in the paper. A huge amount of money.
Right.
And all of those people, of course, have gotten government checks each time, and those government checks certainly have other things deducted, right? They have Social Security, they have the medical costs.
Retirement,
So deductions
this and that,
are taken out of everybody's check before they get a government check, and certainly this thing.
Right. And I was one of the judges, Judge Edgar Ross first, and then when he left the bench, and I in St. Thomas, I became the family division judge. Both of us were notorious for putting parents in jail who did not pay child support and could have. And that's the important thing, that they're able to pay child support and they willingly don't.
Right.
So the repercussions are you go to jail.
Let me ask you more importantly, the end of enforcement. Laws are only as strong as the enforcement behind them. You and I'll agree on that. But what is the net result? For those out there listening to this broadcast, let's say a husband and in some cases a wife.
That's right.
Matter of fact, I'd like to be a kept man. I'm looking for a woman with a lot of money that I could possibly get on child support.
Some woman's pay.
Absolutely. And Holland would fit into that role very well. You know that, right? Can you imagine an order being issued to support Holland Redfield?
Well, as you said, comedy is important.
Yes, that takes a very vivid imagination.
And I got very good taste. I guarantee I'd get the front page of the newspaper. However, let's talk about how it affects a family. And we're talking about these critical years, and it can be all the way up through a child going through, I guess it's up to 21, isn't it? In any event.
Yes, if the child goes to college.
What it does to the family where all of a sudden the rug is pulled out from underneath. Of course, it can be a dispute between a husband and wife. Of course, I would like to see everybody try to work these things out. But the destruction of the family and the children.
Yes.
In some cases, the father is not even visiting the children.
Yes.
So as a judge, how do you maintain your balance by looking at this pain?
It's very difficult. And if you look at the recent kids count report,
yes,
a third of our children live in poverty.
In poverty, yeah.
And so hence, what causes poverty? There's no money coming in to the parents to support them. And that's shocking. We're not living in a third world country. We're living in the United States of America. So how could a third of our children be living in poverty?
Yeah.
And I've seen children in poverty. I've done missionary work in Honduras. I've done missionary work in Peru, in the Amazon jungles of Peru. I've done missionary work, and that's poverty. That's poverty. And to look at our children, a third of our children living in poverty, that's just unacceptable.
No, it's unacceptable. And when you take a look at the effects, as I say, it has on the family.
Yes.
I'll bet as a judge, I don't know how many years you were on the bench, but I've talked to a couple of judges, been on the bench for a great deal of time. And the repeat of the next generation, having potentially a child of that first one that didn't get child support, getting into a relationship, and they themselves are committing the same issue. Or the female, because of lack of, self-esteem, repeating the process again.
Right. Well, I was a judge for 6.5 years. Wow. I didn't see that, but what I did see was I would see the parents in child support, then I would see them in domestic violence court, then I would see the child in juvenile delinquent court, and sometimes I would be in the adult court and there would be one of the parents in the adult court. So it's not just an isolated incident where there's no child support or lack of child support. Sure. There are a lot of repercussions.
So you've seen the net result is, we call it collateral damage.
Correct. That's right.
Fratricide, how's that? In any event, let's take a break. We'll be back in a minute. You're on AM 970 WSTX.
Listen to Straight Talk with Redfield online at WSTXAM.com. Get ready to call in at 773-0490. Straight Talk with Redfield will be right back on AM 970 WSTX.
All right, and we're back again, and you're on Straight Talk with Redfield, and I have Judge Diase and, of course, Bob White, the mayor, and we are giving her a series of thought-provoking questions. We're getting into the way she thinks, everybody, now. You know, I take a look at this budget, which was originally $144 million. We're talking about the FY 2016. And the way they pulled this thing together, I'll go over all the numbers for you. And the numbers are interesting. $25.5 million is actually, they're going to slow up the payments again of the tax refunds, right? But the most telling one is this decrease of about $25 million in appropriations, and obviously that will reduce to allotments. And then, of course, they have a line of credit which actually is being collateralized by the property tax being charged 2 times in one tax period. But when you take a look at the allotments, and we're talking about excluding the federal government part of the budget.
Yes.
That means there is going to be a lot of layoffs again. They're not going to be able to avoid it. Matter of fact, I'm aware that there are some taking place right now. And if you say that, just to round it off, $700 million is to do with the local general fund's deficit, I mean, you're talking about, what, 25 million? You're talking about over 20% of the budget. And when the departments in the government of the Virgin Islands represent the employment levels, we're talking about 89 to 95% of that budget is salaries. Pretend you were facing this. And I made it very clear whoever won the election would really struggle their way through this, because we have not seen the bottom yet. What do you think of that?
Well, I said before the election, and my position remains the same. We need to tighten our belts, and it comes from the top. And I don't eat lobster. I eat sandwiches.
Do you?
Yes. Actually, I'm a pescatarian. I'm a vegetarian who eats fish. But
that's what they call it?
Yes, not a Presbyterian, a pescatarian.
Oh, and not a
She's not a pest.
She's not a Presbyterian either.
But yes.
You're a Catholic, aren't you?
No.
No.
I'm a Christian, non-denominational.
So
yes,
you're a spiritualist?
Yes.
Okay, I could tell that.
So anyway, back to the question. I think we have to tighten our belts, and tighten our belts severely, but it comes from the head setting the direction. And we can't have one department tightening and not across the board. And when the people see that there's an executive branch that is really trying to conserve and save and do what it can with the little bit of money it has, I think that the people will be behind.
So you're talking about the optics, right? The optics, what you're seeing versus the degree of pain in the street, what you're seeing resulting in how money is being expended.
Yes.
But, and I'm not defending anybody here, I'm just talking about that, let's say, other than the optics, that we saw a great deal of responsibility in that particular area. Okay. I don't care what you do. Right now, it is spun so far down. Of course, it makes it that more important, or let's say that more difficult to tackle the big issues if you constantly have the press after you. And I had the lieutenant governor here. We were talking about that and the challenges. And of course, the responsibility of the press is the fourth branch of government. So it's a reality of what we're all dealing with. And heavens, there isn't anybody here that does not want to see this administration succeed. I'm dead serious. I mean, we don't have any choice but to do that. But when you see these kind of things going on, and you ask yourself, and know, like for instance, when I just went over here, there are going to be more potential layoffs. I wonder at what point that you lose your entire mandate to move forward. I mean, is there a point where you get to that?
We should learn from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico hid its head in the sand for a long, long time. And I'm very concerned about our future. You say, well, tightening the belt is not enough, but it's a major step in the right direction.
Well, it allows you to move forward with the issues that you want to be moving forward with, because as you look at this budget deficit, Puerto Rico's is $72 billion. After sometime this month, the SEC has required us to have what is our real deficit. And there wasn't any argument when I was talking to OMB $3.7 billion with a population of a little over 100,000.
Right.
That's how much
Whoa.
has to be reported.
Right.
But we never had to report the $2 billion unfunded
Correct.
liability. You know, we
Correct.
never had
Yes,
to
that's
report
right. That's
the
right.
promises we made,
That's
retroactive
right.
pay.
That's
We
right.
promised bringing
That's
people
right.
up on
And if
step.
you're a lender, are you going to lend to someone who is this kind of... Of course not.
Yeah.
So that's
Yes.
what it comes down to. The lenders now have a full picture, as they do in Puerto Rico. And when you look at that kind of a picture, you say, I'm sorry, you
Yeah.
can't borrow anymore.
Right.
So that changes because borrowing money is like having a printing press. I mean, the federal government
Yes,
has a
exactly.
literal printing
Yes,
press, but
yes.
borrowing is the same thing.
Right.
It's exactly the same thing.
Right.
And we've had that printing press up until right recently. And it's very disappointing. Now, you have said something, and Holland and I talk about it all the time. The unions prevent cutting from the top down. The unions require that you cut from the bottom up. Someone who has just entered. So if you need to cut 10,000 or let's say 50,000 salary, cutting from the bottom up, there's probably 3 people involved. Cutting from the top down, there might be only 1 person or,
Right.
or even less than 1 person. So union strangulation on what we have to do is a real problem. And I don't know how you deal with that. What do you think?
Well, I've always promoted transparent government, open and transparent government. And I strongly believe that if the union, if it's conveyed to the union the financial situation that we're in, and we're transparent about it, we're not hiding anything, I believe very strongly that these type of issues can be negotiated. I don't believe a union is going to take a hardline position
Not
if we're
now.
open and transparent
Not
with our financial situation.
Well, we're certainly disappointed. And Holland has mentioned it many times. In Puerto Rico, that's exactly what the teachers, which is the biggest union anywhere, the teachers union did. They won the court case.
They
right?
won the case.
And that was part of the destruction of the government. But they didn't care.
They were.
Now,
but
I
they,
doubt
well,
they care.
Yeah, they won the battle but lost the war. And what happened was it forced the courts to say, you're absolutely right. Now let's split up the carcass. What is left and what are the meat on the bones? So in essence, you've got a situation right now where we are competing for limited resources. And I'll ask you the question, and I've had Judge Ross here, and we're talking about this GRS. If this thing is not handled,
That's
and we're
right.
talking about an
Yes.
infusion, because if you and I walk back, all of us in this room, to 2007, 2008, stateside economy destroyed. We're talking about energy costs at its highest at that
Yes.
point here, and then we got the closure of Ovensa. The central government leaned on the GERS. And of course, the central government was not paying what the
That's
deductions
right.
were from these
That's
folks.
correct.
So don't you think if you were to say to yourself now, with $300 million that's generated that goes into the economy here, and we're talking about people that are not even in the system, so don't think you're left out of this thing. What would you do? Would you bring everybody up on step and pay retroactive pay, or would you deal with the potential collapse of the GRS? And it appears to me that the administration is opting for the other solution
That's
to
right.
this. And
That's
they
right.
may be right, but I am, of course, on the retirement system. We're supposed to have at least 3 people supporting the one that's
That's right,
retired.
yes,
And
yes.
it doesn't work the way it
Yes,
is. You know,
yes.
don't you think that this retirement system, like Social Security, is really a legal Ponzi scheme? No, it's legal.
We've been put in a very difficult financial situation, but we just can't look at GERS without looking at everything.
Everything.
And I've always said, until you get in there and really know the financial condition and what is going on, I'm an outsider looking at things from the outside.
Yes.
I don't know what the true figures are.
Sure.
They're representations made, but how do we know they're valid? If we see money being spent very frivolously, $18,000 on a trip to Guam, and we're wondering, well, is there really money in the government budget? Everybody sits back and thinks that. There's really money there. And we're just being told that there's no money there. So looking at it from a layperson's point of view, someone who's not in there, not actually having access to the numbers, if you don't see the cutback coming from on high, you really question whether or not they're playing with the figures. I understand GRS, that's a major situation that has to be dealt with, but I don't think you can look at it in isolation.
You can't.
We have to look at it all together.
Well, I think there is little or no doubt just looking at borrowing. Forget about everything else. We know what's borrowed because it's a public statement that has to be made, and the borrowing is in the public arena. When you borrow, you don't have the money.
That's right.
So let's not make it complicated.
That's right.
It's simple. The spending far exceeds the income. Now, borrowing has been part of the income. Borrowing is ended now. So we are now not able to print money. And that means something. And I agree with you. I'd cut from the top down. I wouldn't cut from the bottom up.
No,
I'd cut from the top down. And that does not make you or I very popular. I mean, I have no income from the government, not one penny, nor did I get a penny when I worked 8 years for the government. Not a penny. So I am the least sympathetic person you could ever come across because I have been there, done it, and never received a penny, no pension, no salary, no nothing.
Right.
Well,
So you don't get to speak to people who have experience like I do, who are not sympathetic, who are not also on the on the income side. So that's an unusual position I hold. It doesn't make me popular.
Yeah.
However, it makes me clear.
Yes.
And it makes me without any conflict of interest. I have none.
So
That's
where
right.
do you start, Bob? From the
Start
top
at the top.
up?
I
Okay,
would-
no. Let's. Are we
I have
going to
a
get
program.
rid of commissioners?
No. We're not talking
Right.
about we're talking about
but
cutting costs.
Let's cutting
Let's
costs.
talk about that.
Right.
For
Let's talk
example,
about it. Let's talk
In the
about it.
pension program, I would have everybody who is there's 7,000 some odd number
Great.
receiving checks. Everybody gets 15 grand. The money that's left, and the money that's left would be how much is paid in by government workers and how much is the gain made on the asset picture, which is 6-7%. That would be an amount of money. That money, after everybody got 15 grand, that would be divided up proportionally according to what percentage you were promised in your original pension.
Right.
That's what I do. What do you think of that?
Interesting.
Be very, very careful,
Interesting.
my dear.
Yes.
Okay.
But
I said interesting. I didn't say
that is a
anything was
security
acceptable.
blanket. Pensions are not supposed to be let you live comfortably. They're supposed to give you security.
Yeah, but what about that guy, Bob? All right.
Pardon?
No, this is what I'm talking about, where it could be anybody. That while all of this decisions were being made, and Judge Diase and I did agree that there was a period of time where literally the retirement system leaned on the central government. And really, it was balancing itself that way. And you know that you have to have so many people out there that are working or in the system for that one retired. The poor guy had a contract, and Judge Ross talked to the issue of a contractual
yes,
relationship.
yes.
But yet, in some respects, I agree with Bob. You can go ahead and have a contract. And they had a contract in Puerto Rico, and the teachers won and they lost. So there has to be some sort of equalization of the pain. But I personally believe that if there is going to be a sacrifice because the government of the Virgin Islands is the sponsor, ultimately the taxpayer is going to pay for it, but that's where it should come from. They should cough up these resources. One way to do it, and I always think about solutions, and you and I are going to discuss this whole Venza thing, or as much as you can discuss it. But that submerged land situation out there, which is $1 a year, if something happens with the storage, there is a funding source that should be dedicated immediately
Yes.
as a funding source, because whoever takes it over, you're going to have to charge them with the submerged land, aren't we?
Yes, definitely.
So why not do that?
Yes. There are so many ways we can get income.
All right, how about another issue,
Yes,
taxation?
yes.
And I'm going to let you speak. All of this internet stuff that's taking place right now. I'm being careful out there. Listen to me. You folks that are in business are paying gross receipts, excise tax, you're paying rent, you're paying
Right,
utilities,
right.
you're doing that. To what benefit?
Employees' wages.
And paying
taxes.
wages, right. Correct.
Yeah, payroll taxes.
So why should somebody be able to go on the internet and make an outside purchase and be supporting an economy somewhere else? Because all states now are doing this, and it's not a collection issue, because what you're doing is you're collecting from the manufacturer or the person who is wholesaling it
Right.
into the Virgin Islands, and they pay on a monthly basis. Doesn't that seem fair?
To tax what
Yes,
is brought in?
what's brought in, or at least put it equal to. And we do have a problem because we don't have a sales tax, but we could have a value-added tax, something like that,
Right.
where it could be applied. What are you feeling with reference to the consumer versus losing an entire tax base?
Well, we always look to the consumer. What happens when there's an issue that we need money, what the government goes and issues 2 property tax bills in 1 year.
Yes.
And this has been, the 3rd year that that's done. And who suffers? But the people who own the real property.
Yes.
And they pass it on, though, to their tenants. So we need to think outside the box. We just can't keep hitting the consumer, the people, the residents with taxes. We have to build up the private economy. I'm very, very strongly in the buildup of the private economy. That has to be done. There's so many creative ideas. I mentioned a lot when I was running for governor. But think outside the box, and just to add another tax. I order a lot from off island and on the internet.
Well, you can volunteer to pay the difference. Well, I know you're the type of person that would do it.
Yeah. But I see it as we have a very tough economy, and that's a way for me to purchase items that most of the time aren't available here.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that they're cheaper, but they're not available here, period.
Correct.
And so, and often that they are less expensive in the States. So why are you putting the burden on us as a consumer to pay another tax? I think if the people saw a government cutting back, becoming really frugal, and it's expensive, cutting back and streamlining services, then the people would be on board. And
so
say,
you're
okay,
talking about make it more palatable.
Well,
yes, but
services are streamlined. We have virtually none of them. Now remember, there's a difference between employment and services, and we are missing that both. There is not a connection here with employment and services.
Right.
Most people working for the government are only there to sustain the government. There are no outside services, not many. Now these are these are very nice people. We know many of them, and I'm not speaking against any individual.
Yeah.
But most government employment is to sustain the government, not to provide services outside of government.
Another interesting concept. I firmly believe that the government can be run very frugally, very streamlined, very efficiently. And I'm a private business owner.
You would run it like a business,
yes,
wouldn't you?
Yes. And I know that when the money isn't coming in, my salary is cut first.
Right.
If I'm an officer in the company, my salary's cut first. I'm not going to cut my employees' salaries first because they have families. They have to support their children. They have their expenses. I'm going to cut mine first. If I have to cut theirs, then I explain to them we just don't have the money, and I'm transparent. If we had a transparent government and a governor and government officials who are coming out and telling the people, listen, we're in this financial situation. We need your help. Join us. Let us all work together. But it's the lack of transparency is very, very troubling. And if you're going to say, okay, let's continue to tax a consumer, we're already paying 2 years of property taxes in 1 year. I mean, that's unconscionable. How much are we going to continue to do that?
But they did it before, and I'm going to get you into the legality of the issue. The banks are only equipped to escrow a year in advance. They're actually doing it 2 years in advance. I had the lieutenant governor here, and we were discussing it. What provisions are there for the bank? Because the bank is going to call on you to say you've got to come in with the money to put in your account.
Exactly.
We've already dispersed the 2015.
Yes,
we need the 2016. The bills came out in August. They have to be paid by February.
Right.
So we got some people, and we got a situation here where, again, the federal income taxes are going to be withheld for a while. Some of them would use that money for that.
That's right.
In any event, let's you and I take a break. But after that, I want to come back and talk to you a little bit about this lawsuit with Hovensa.
Okay.
Because you did advise, I'm going to correct the governor, to go ahead with the lawsuit. Are you going to say, is that interesting?
That is another interesting.
All right, well, we'll be back. We'll be back in a minute. Listen, wait till you hear the interesting answer. We'll be back in a minute. You're on AM 970 WSTX.
Listen to Straight Talk with Redfield online at WSTXAM.com. Get ready to call in at 773-0490. Straight Talk with Redfield will be right back on AM 970 WSTX.
All right, when you out there, again, you're on Straight Talk with Redfield. When you hear that's an interesting question.
Or answer.
Oh, the answer is more interesting than anybody would want to reveal. No, what I'm saying is that we're now not going to talk about the case exactly. We're going to talk about the decisions of an individual going to go ahead with a complicated litigation. Do you think about the fact that maybe if you win, you lose?
Yes.
Okay.
And as a lawyer, I always advise my clients. I'm not
Right.
saying in this case
No,
because I have
understand.
nothing. I have no
know
input.
you're pleading total innocence
Yes,
on this
yes.
thing. Okay.
Attorney-client privilege, et cetera, et cetera. No,
Whatever.
but it's very important that a lawyer advise a client from the get-go. These are the alternatives. If you go to court, you may be successful, but then how much are you going to pay in attorney's fees? Will you ever get those costs back?
Well, not only that, when you're dealing with an industry, or as you said, our answer is to grow our way out of this, who do you maybe dissuade? Maybe not in the oil industry, but somebody that is thinking of coming in here. There is nothing worse than a business worried about having and operating in a litigious community.
That's right.
Okay.
Oh,
Now, when you have more lawyers that are in the newspaper than there are plumbers and electricians, what is that saying?
is that correct? Are your
Oh,
figures
yes,
correct?
it is correct.
let me tell
Oh,
you.
absolutely.
No,
Holland is
actually, I measured it in like insurance companies consider a community litigious if when you open the phone book, there are more than 2 lawyers per plumber in the phone book. We have 56 lawyers for every plumber in our phone book.
Would you believe that?
Now, that would indicate a litigious community.
That's hard to believe, but
But let's
I don't
go,
doubt what you're saying.
Let's go
So
back.
we need more plumbers.
But
or fewer lawyers.
We
One
need
of the
more
two.
plumbers
Or
and
fewer
electricians.
lawyers.
Well, maybe a plumber or a lawyer that does plumbing on the side. That might
Or
be
a
a
plumber
good
that does legal work on the
right,
side.
in any event. But what I'm saying is, let's go back to that discussion. We're not talking about Hovensa now.
Right.
We're talking about what Bob brought up a little bit earlier. You win the battle and lose the war. Now, if there was an attorney working for the teachers in Puerto Rico, maybe they should have cautioned them that, I'm going to win this case.
Yes.
But let me tell you what the net result is going to
Yes.
be. Whatever you have in there now, you're going to get 30 cents on the dollar. So maybe what you should do is give them a little wiggling room to find out another funding source or whatever and
Yes.
deal with it that way.
Yes, yes.
Now, well, yesterday we had an interesting conversation here. We had a wonderful time, actually, you and I and our friend. And
That's
this-
Carl Knight,
Yes.
and he
Yes,
he
yes.
never said that, that's an interesting question. He
never
walked
did.
right into the
it was
trap.
great, boy. We had a good. The three of us had a good
Yes,
time. It was a very manly afternoon.
Oh, God, here we go, manly.
But I said, and Holland said, both I said, and you picked up on it. This week in the paper, there was a headline that says the refinery Hovensa is going to be nationalized. The word seizure was there, and seizure for government means nationalizing it,
Yes,
basically. The same
yes.
thing. Now, I asked him, and we spoke about it.
Oh, we
Is
already
that
know
a
what
goal
I'm gonna
of this government to nationalize the refinery? Now, Venezuela did that with not too much success. Cuba did it with less success. Other countries have done it with not great success. But the headline, huge headline, you may have seen it. It was Monday. Seizure, government seizure, and then what's-his-face oil, who are not in the oil business. They own a couple of gas stations and a few cans of oil somewhere, I guess.
But think about it.
This is
when
not
you're
gonna encourage
dealing
others to
with
come here.
a litigation, and we're not talking about we're going to get you away from it. That's an interesting question.
Yes.
I'm kind of seducing you into this process here. But you're too smart for that. In any event, it's the same thing when a bank forecloses on a home.
Right.
Generally, what will happen to protect the mortgage, the bank will come in and bid on it, right?
Correct.
All right.
Yes.
Now, they'll bid on the mortgage, but then there also is a situation where you have a deficiency judgment, right?
Yes.
And in some cases, you can have a deed in lieu of foreclosure. In other
Yes,
words, you
you
would
can.
say to some bank,
That's
look,
right.
let's let bygones
take it,
be bygones.
correct.
Take your
Right.
licks. We don't want to have the individual liable for this. Now, we get back to Hovensa. The government itself, to protect itself, is going to have to be part of the process of bidding. And am I correct? When you bid, you generally, it doesn't matter whether you're the government or a private entity wanting to bid on it, you got to come up with the money, don't you?
Yes, but you can be creative too. You you can have a buyer on the side willing,
Yes.
as soon as you go in and bid and
We do that
have
all
a-
the
yeah,
time
you have a deal.
when we get zoning changes. What's happening is, and this is what I always think, there should be a tax on what you would call a capital gains tax on short term. In other words, speculators.
Right.
If somebody is politically well situated and knows they can get the zoning change, and then all of a sudden it was agriculture and now it's designed
That's
for
right.
a hotel,
That's right.
these generally these people have it already sold.
That's
don't they?
right.
And that's not
Correct.
fair.
Correct.
Do you think if somebody's rolling over like that in less than 6 months, there shouldn't be a speculator tax like they have in the United States?
No.
No.
Because it's the use that you're interested in. Okay, the individual
Wait
is
a
not the
minute.
issue. The use, if the use is appropriate,
Right.
and the legislative body is supposed to be dealing with the use. Now, you can say they're not capable of going beyond individuals. You may be right. But it's all about use. I mean, I sat for too many years ruling on
wait a
these
minute.
things.
No.
The use of a hotel on that property is the issue.
We're
The
not
individual
talking.
is
We're not
the issue.
talking about a variance.
no, it doesn't matter. Zoning
Wait a
change.
minute.
doesn't mean
We're
zoning.
talking about using the system itself,
Well,
which
but the
is
system
fine.
requires it.
Wait a minute.
Zoning is a law.
Massachusetts, we're talking about parts of Long Island, different areas where you have very limited landmass, and you are using this as a vehicle strictly for short-term political gains on this thing, and then all of a sudden roll it for millions of dollars. And you had never had any intention to do that. I did this because I wanted you to build a hotel.
Oh, but the hotel is the only issue. The hotel is the issue.
How about the large amount of profit that's made in a short
But so
period
what?
of time?
It's the issue. It's
Oh,
the
okay.
hotel.
All right.
If the community,
It's an interesting.
after the public hearings,
It's an interesting answer.
and after public hearings, if the community decides and the legislative body decides a hotel makes sense there, it's not about who, it's about what. And the community's interest is in, if they decide a hotel is
You
appropriate,
sound just like a
it's
realtor.
about the hotel.
You're like a
no,
realtor.
this is just sensible.
Right.
Because if everything is reduced to who, which it often
Well,
is.
then Cape Cod
here-
and all these other
Yeah, okay,
areas,
They deal with
all
what?
of these
They
other
deal with
areas
what?
with limited land mass,
Everybody
they've
has
been
limited
wrong.
land mass. There's
They've
no such
been
thing as
wrong.
unlimited land
They're
mass. So
bad.
by the
Look,
very
we're
nature
talking
of
about
everything is
waterfront
limited.
land.
Well, everything is limited. There's nothing that isn't limited. Where you were raised, it was limited. The teeny island I grew
right.
up on was a fourth the size of St. Croix, Manhattan Island. That certainly was limited. But you decide based on the use whether that makes sense. That's what it... Now, if you say the system is corrupt, then we should speak about corruption.
It doesn't have to
not
be
the
corrupt.
use.
I'm not even talking about corruption. We're talking about the fact of short term, and you have short term capital gains, long term capital gains when you're buying stock, buying short, or this or that. That's the only reason. I'm going to get you back now. We're not talking about Provenza. We're talking about... Well, we could talk a little bit about it because I don't know the way to couch this. That if you're going ahead and you're going to be selling, let's say, for instance, and you're in a bankruptcy, and you're selling the storage area. Now, one of the interesting observations that came out in the Daily News is that if you now are advising the buyer, you want it to be free and clear.
Definitely.
But if you
yes.
have situations where the government of the Virgin Islands is in litigation for back taxes, other things, liability on, again, we're talking environmental liability, how can the government itself release at that point?
That's right.
And have some, if you don't release, now you're representing the prospective buyer. She isn't everybody, don't get nervous. We're doing one of these just tra-la-las. We're doing a tra-la-la, and I have no agenda here other than try to get an answer out of you. How in heaven's name are you going to have to, how are you going to give anybody free title?
I don't know. That's a very difficult situation. How do you... Typically, what's done is money could be put in escrow.
Okay.
But
who's going to put it in escrow?
That's right. How do you determine how much money in an
you gotta-
environmental case? I mean, that could be millions of dollars, and there's no. It's not easily quantifiable. So I don't know. That's a big dilemma.
All right. How do you exercise a judgment? Now we're talking about now you win the case.
Right. Right.
Part of the partners, and I do understand why the governor is going all the way back to the parent company, and there's an issue of the corporate veil and all that kind of jazz, which you know more about than I do. But when you actually, the Hovensa, we're talking about the Venezuelans and the parent company here, not the parent company, but the corporation, how we can exercise a judgment on a country that is an enemy of ours? Aren't they liable for half that
That's
judgment?
well.
Do you mobilize the National Guard and go down there and take a
Well,
bank?
stepping back, not
stepping
looking
back.
at when I served for any time as acting AG, just stepping back and looking at this as a lawyer, analyzing a hypothetical situation. That's what I would advise my client. I mean, that's one of the very important
What would
issues
you
that have to
advise
be. Are we in district court? Are we in a federal court? Are we in a local court? How are we going to enforce a local court judgment? How are we going to enforce a federal court judgment? Which is easier to enforce? All of these things have to be considered. Is there any treaty with Venezuela where the judgments can be enforced? I doubt it.
But I'm assuming you did have a discussion with your client, didn't you?
The client would have to be advised of that.
Okay. But that process where, again, that press conference when you did go up there, and I heard your discussions regarding this, we're not talking about the severing of the relationship, was that you were 100% behind this litigation.
I am not going to comment on that.
Another interesting question. All right, news department, she didn't comment on it. However, the whole thing is interesting. I want to get back to this litigious, and we're not talking about just overall. And we're talking about enforcement of different laws that we have here,
Yes.
right? And we're talking about whether they're labor laws or whatever, and taking a look at a lot of the labor laws that we do have here. They're archaic. The wrongful discharge law is really not in the benefit of the prospective employee that loses their job because it tips off, and the individual that's in business might be trying to save the business.
Yes.
We're talking about the plant closing law, which is more importantly. These kind of things is when do we massage what we already have on the books, where somebody, whether they're under tax exemptions or not, are taking a look at, is this a friendly place to go with reference to the existing laws?
And even Puerto Rico is asking to have the minimum wage law curtailed there. So there is clearly a recognition now in some places, certainly Puerto Rico is one, where some of these laws, though well-intentioned and seem good at the time, don't really work. They work against you.
Right.
Well, there's always an argument with the minimum wage issue. It is always that way, but ultimately it is the taxpayer who is going to pay for it anyway, because you have more people, again, on social programs. You just take a look at the earned income credit thing, which is a good law. But we're under the mirror theory of taxation. It comes out $30 million comes right out of our local treasury.
Right.
But if it wasn't there, then they would be leaning on other social programs, which we end up paying for anyway.
Right. Well, getting back to the legislature and what you were saying, the legislature has so much power. Instead of continually creating new laws, they need to get together and look at the laws in different areas. We have probate laws that are very archaic.
Right.
They've been submissions to change the probate law. It was changed and then and revised, and then that was done away with. And there's so much that needs to be done that affects our residents on a day-to-day basis. And that's what the legislature is there for, not continually passing new laws, but look at what we have there and how can we make it better. What are the problems with the existing laws? We have on the transparency laws, open records. That's a very weak law. How can we make it stronger? In regard to white-collar crime, instead of passing new laws, how can we make the laws stronger? Because as you said, we can have laws on the books and not enforced.
Only as strong as the enforcement.
Right.
But when you're asked to cut budgets, and I don't care who you are and what head of what department right now, Bob says cut it at the top. I understand that. But you reach a point where you no longer have any teeth. Because you don't have anybody either push a pencil or a pen or do anything like that or sit in front of a computer. We're seeing that right now when we're trying to deal with, again, grants and so on and so forth, which could decrease the pressure on the general fund. I mean, we're really talking about secession, and we're talking about institutional knowledge that I worry about. excluding whoever got elected and how it was done.
Right. I understand.
There has to be a point at which you have institutional knowledge.
Yes,
and
yes.
boy, oh boy, I mean, anybody sitting on the top, you have no Indians. All chiefs and no Indians. And the bureaucracy is not run at the commissioner's level, or even the deputies. It's those out there that are listening to this broadcast that are in the trenches that make this thing work.
Right. Well, what you're looking at are what I believe are salaries that can be, we're not talking about completely eliminating positions, but salaries that can be cut.
Yes.
And across the board.
Well, I don't think across the board that's absolutely wrong.
Well, I think
You're wrong.
all
Because
commissioners
you cannot
across
put
the board.
a hospital in the same position as Parks and Recreation. I'm sorry. Hospital is far more important.
Well,
It has
when
to
I
be looked at
say,
differently.
yeah, well, but you're saying commissioners across the board.
No,
you cut the
but we're talking about
salaries.
departments because clearly a hospital is more important than many other departments.
And I'm sure the judge realizes
yes,
that.
yes.
I mean, you
But
can't
I
put her.
know you felt that way. Just
can't-
clarify
You
that.
can't put her in that
Right.
category. This
Yeah.
is a sharp woman here. I mean, you're trying to throw the trap for the gal.
She's so good. It is such a
well, let me tell
pleasure
you,
to have her
she
with
used
us.
to have you in court and bang the gavel and say, sit down and shut up. In any event, when we come back, we're going to play a little. I don't know whether you heard this song by, what's it, Matt Redman. What is well with my soul?
Yes.
Have you ever heard that?
Yes, definitely.
I don't know whether and it is so applicable to here because it outlines some of the things we were discussing here in generality about keeping your spirit up and the challenges you have in life. Now we're going to go to a break because I'm a Republican. I got to pay for this broadcast. You ran with the Republican.
Yes, I did.
Did any of that rub off on you?
Well, as I tell people, I'm conservative on certain issues, and I'm middle of the road on others, and I'm liberal on other
Well, then we
issues.
can go into all of these issues when you come back. We'll pin you down.
Wonderful.
All right, we'll be back in a minute, and then we're going to play that song by Matt Redman. I think you'll enjoy it. We'll be back in a minute. You're on AM 970 WSTX.
Listen to Straight Talk with Redfield online at WSTXAM.com. Get ready to call in at 773-0490. Straight Talk with Redfield will be right back on AM 970 WSTX.
All right, and we are back again, and you're on Straight Talk with Redfield on AM 970 WSTX. And again, I got Judge Diase here and Bob White. Now,
One of her favorite people.
without us badgering you, you're used to that, right? Did they call that in the legal redirect? What is the term redirect?
No, it's cross-examination.
Oh,
When you're being
cross-examination.
badgered.
When you're being badgered.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, do you think that, again, different lawyers have different styles? Am I correct?
Definitely. Yes.
I object, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Now, some of them are better off speaking to the jury. Is that what
Yeah,
I mean?
that's true.
Strategy-wise.
That's true. Yes.
And then trying to make and demonize the witness
Yes. Yes.
and bringing up a lot of this extemporaneous stuff that
That's
doesn't
right.
mean anything.
That's right.
And then
right.
the lawyer on the other side objects, and you decide whether it is or it isn't.
That's right. That's right.
So how do you make these determinations? We're talking
As a
about your
judge?
background, yeah.
As a judge, you listen to the arguments and you know already what the facts are in the case, what the legal issues are, and you use your good judgment. That's what I did.
Now, if it's getting closer to lunchtime, do you tend to object more?
No, as a judge, I don't object.
But ruling on the
Yes,
objection.
yes, yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts on your part? Anything that you want to get off your chest? Nobody listens to the show.
Nobody listens to the show.
So you can say whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, I really like to talk about next time I'm on. I was sick. I did spend 5 weeks in Paris. I took an advanced course with Cornell Law School, and I studied at at the Sorbonne Pantheon. Cornell Law School has a summer institute there, and I took courses on global litigation, global financial markets, international human rights, global corporations, and just living there in Paris and getting the perspective of the Parisians and the Europeans on the
Yes.
United States and all that's happening in the European Union with international rights that we can then apply here. So I'd love the opportunity
Well,
to
no,
come
wait a
on
minute.
and
I'll
talk
give you
about
another
that.
5 minutes here. Let's go talk a little bit about how would this apply here, other than it's a beautiful place to go to school.
Right. Well, for example, the class on international human rights.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that the European Human Rights Court had made so much progress on the human rights issues. And in regard to our being able to vote for president, voting rights among the international human rights community are deemed fundamental human rights. And even in England now, there's a big controversy because people who are in jail are denied the right to vote. So England is being brought before the International Human Rights Court because that's a violation of fundamental human rights. So you take it down to us to be able to vote for president. In essence, we are being denied our fundamental human right because we're not able to vote for president. There is the organization here, not the European International Court, but there's a organization, the American, the OAS, that's here and in South America, that the United States is part of the treaty. And so we can argue violation of human rights because of our inability as Virgin Islanders to vote for president, because that is a fundamental human right. And also just looking at the judicial system within France, what they've done to make it the cases flow quickly, they have a court that deals with the administrative and then you have a court that deals with all the other issues, and within that court is the civil and the criminal. But I think we need to look at here, yes, we have our superior court, we have a magistrate's court, but if we start dividing them up into divisions where one judge will handle administrative issues, another judge will handle criminal jury trials, another judge will handle civil jury trials, and civil non-jury and probate, I think we can divide up the divisions within the court to make it more efficient. They're doing that a lot in the States, as a matter of fact. And judges who are experts, for example, we have Judge Willocks, who sits on the bench in St. Croix. He comes predominantly from a criminal background, criminal practice background. We can have judges who have that expertise inside a criminal division, and they will move cases fast. Why? Because that's their expertise. Then we get an attorney who's fluent in working with juries as a judge, and then they can handle. They understand the issues. But what we do is we take attorneys who may have a predominantly criminal practice, and then put them into a general division court, and then they have to handle civil and civil.
Well, it's a waste
jury.
of talent, not only that.
But they don't understand what happens in the civil jury, which is totally different than what happens in a criminal jury. And what happens then to the cases? The judge who does not have a full understanding of a certain area of the law, those cases go on the back burner.
All right, let me ask you an interesting question. You did mention this, and I know for a fact there is legislation to extend voting rights to prisoners. What are your thoughts on that, personally?
I think it also depends on what the crime is.
So you're going to differentiate the crime?
Well, yeah, we have felonies and we have misdemeanors.
No, I understand that. So you're talking about, let's say, a misdemeanor. You would say that would not be.
A misdemeanor, yes, and those the record can be expunged with.
So why would a misdemeanor prohibit somebody running for public office? A misdemeanor could be a parking ticket, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
in
it's
essence,
less than 1 year in jail.
We're talking about Congress, the United States Senate. I'm sure a lot of them have parking tickets.
Well, now, what's interesting, the Court Napoleon, which of course is you're guilty till proven innocent, I'm not certain I agree with that.
With what?
That you're guilty till proven innocent.
Oh, absolutely not.
But the Court Napoleon is that structure, isn't it?
I didn't hear that. Okay. In all my studies, I didn't hear that. Anyway.
I want to thank you for the interview.
Thank you so much.
We're good. Don't be a stranger. We want to have you back again.
Yes, thank you.
I think that this was very informative for those out there. And again, sometimes what we got to do is we got to
spice things up.
Think about spice things up and so on. And you always spice it up. And your transparency is refreshing.
Thank
you. Unusual because there are a lot of people that I have on here that aren't transparent.
Yes.
All right, we'll be
Have
back.
sandwiches for us next time.
I did not name names. We'll be back in a minute. You're on AM 970 WSTX.
Listen to Straight Talk with Redfield online at WSTXAM.com. Get ready to call in at 773-0490. Straight Talk with Redfield will be right back on AM 970 WSTX.